2014, joined in this segment by the senior United States Senator of the state of Wisconsin, Ron Johnson. Good to have you back, Senator Johnson. Well, I want to start off, you and I have spent the last few years on these shows talking about budgets and about finance, but I want to switch up a little bit because you just returned from an international trip. You and other United States senators were in Ukraine over the weekend, over the last few days. So I want to get your sense. What did you see there? What is the situation? And are there any good options for the United States in that region of the world?
Well, first of all, it's a pretty sobering experience. I mean, you're sitting there talking to the Prime Minister of Ukraine, the President of Ukraine. You can see the stress on their voices. I mean, here you have, for the first time since the Cold War, really since the 1940s, you've got, this aggressive action, this illegal action by Vladimir Putin, a man that's really pretty well got his designs on reconstituting the Soviet Union, and you've got these individuals having to deal with that, having participated in these protests, being drawn into what I call the killing zone, into the ambush. And when the snipers opened fire, we were on the Maidan. We walked up and we had this described to us. And proudly certainly Soviet-backed snipers opened fire, killing more than 100 people. They stood their ground. So you understand, having heard that story, seeing the place, understand the courage of people that protested against corrupt government, protested for the right for self-determination and freedom. And that's a pretty moving experience. And so I just hope that having gone there in a bipartisan fashion with Democrat and Republican senators, that we can remain united. We can send a strong signal to Vladimir Putin and, quite honestly, the Ukrainian people that we will stand with Ukrainians in their quest for self-determination, for freedom, and for a corruption-free government.
But what does that mean? Because the President of the United States came out yesterday, and a couple of days ago, and he announced a series of sanctions targeting 7 individuals in the Russian government. Well, they are laughing at us.
No, yeah, it's very frustrating. We should be doing far more. It was pretty depressing that the President, when asked by the Prime Minister of Ukraine, when the Prime Minister of Ukraine was here in Washington, described how Yanukovych had basically hollowed out their military. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. So he, out of more than 100,000 official members of the military, they only had 6,000 troops that were ready to fight. And just asked this President, can you send us some small arms? Can you send us some ammunition? And our President said, no, not at this point in time. Now, I think we need to do far more in terms of showing strength, showing resolve in the world across the board. And certainly when you have people with that level of courage that have demonstrated, that told us when we were there, they are going to defend their nation. We need to do far more than just level sanctions on 11 individuals, an action that was, like I say, just mocked by Russia. That's just sad.
What are our options? Let's say that tomorrow morning Vladimir Putin sends the tanks into eastern Ukraine. We're not going to be on the ground. We're not going to militarily intervene in that. What are the options?
Well, first of all, we need to reassert the central role of NATO. And Vice President was there, and they're saying all the right words. This president is great at saying the right things, but what he's not particularly good at is following up those words with real action, with real resolve.
And the rest of the world sees that.
One of my suggestions is, why don't we send in, and again, I'm trying to figure out something we get our Democratic colleagues to also agree to. How about we send in a military mission? We all agree that the Ukrainian military is hollowed out. Why don't we send military advisors, not boots on the ground, not combat boots, but let's assess what Ukrainian military needs short-term as well as long-term. That would send a pretty strong signal. Why don't we send those MREs in? Why don't we fly those in C-130s and get an American aircraft on the ground to show Vladimir Putin that we are going to finally stand our ground, and we're going to stand up for other freedom-seeking people.
What do you think in the capitals of countries like North Korea, China, Syria, and Iran, what do you think they make of what's going on right now?
They realize that they can do just about anything they want to with impunity, and they really don't have to worry about America's reaction anymore. I mean, that's just a sad fact. Mitt Romney wrote a very good column, and the basic point he made is just true. There's not a country in the world that has greater respect for the United States after 5 years of President Obama's administration. That's a pretty sad fact.
Now, earlier today, you issued a statement on an issue that I think people are having a hard time getting their head around and switching gears a little bit. A week ago, on Friday, the Obama administration announced that it was going to stop having any sort of involvement, any sort of monitoring of the organization that runs the World Wide Web, the Internet. Nobody knows now what happens. And you issued a statement earlier today, the day that we're taping, saying that you were very, very skeptical of the administration's ability to manage the transition. How should people react to this? I mean, a lot of people, the first reaction was good. The United States government's not involved in the internet. This is a good thing. You're not convinced of that.
Well, I don't trust this administration to be able to negotiate or lay out a proposal that would actually keep all governments away from the internet. Now, in theory, would that be a good thing? Sure. I mean, I would like to maintain a healthy distrust of any government, including our own. But the fact of the matter is, right now, the United States remains governing control of the internet, which is probably a pretty good thing, and you better have something that guarantees that no other government, no other governmental body, no international body could gain control, because that's exactly what the international community wants to do. People like Putin want to gain control of the internet to make it less free.
Is that possible?
In theory, there's an awful lot of parts of the internet right now that are governed by non-governmental authorities, and it is pretty free. It's been pretty remarkable. So can you give up that? We're basically talking about the entity that creates domain names. Can you potentially give that up? Maybe. There may be a system of doing it. I just don't trust this president to do it properly.
Why do you think the Obama administration took this move? Was it in reaction to the international pressure and the distrust of the United States government because of the NSA scandal?
I think that has a lot to do with it, yeah.
So part of the question is, do you trust the U.S. government? My answer would be no. But I distrust every other government and international organization
much more. Correct.
Much more than that. I want to ask you about your relationship with the president, because obviously, with all of the partisan divide in Washington D.C., you have had a chance to interact with the president. I know that there was a time when you were hoping that you could get through to him on some of the budget and the financial and fiscal issues. Can you just describe what has been your relationship with the president? Have you been able to get through to him on some of these fiscal issues?
Not exactly. Listen, I've always said I'm willing to work with anybody who's willing to first acknowledge the problem, acknowledge reality, then work with me in good faith. So the president had dinner with us and made a staff available. We were working with him. Two quick stories maybe illustrate the point. I was certainly pushing a 30-year budget projection, which really shows the real problem we have, the demographic problem. And I was in the White House, and we'd done projections showing the deficit over the next 30 years at $107 trillion. And I was trying to entice the president, please, our first act of bipartisanship is let's agree on these numbers, but let's go to the American public and show them, so they're prepared for the solutions. And he just looked at me and said, Ron, we show the American public numbers this big, and they're going to throw up their hands, give up hope. And he said, besides, Ron, we can't do all the work here. We've got to leave some work for future presidents and future Congresses. Okay? So now let's fast forward. We're in the White House during the shutdown. The president's in the lectern, gave a little spiel, and then we're 45 Republican senators in chairs, kind of like we're in his class. And we get to ask him questions, make comments. I'm probably about the fifth senator that said something. And I stood up and said, Mr. President, we talked about that 30-year projection. You have a historic opportunity here. You're a Democrat president willing to work with people willing to work with you to solve these problems once and for all. Republican president doesn't have that opportunity. George Bush tried to do Social Security, got slaughtered politically. So, Mr. President, please take advantage of this opportunity. I mean, you've got 3 years left in your term. I've got 3 years left in mine. If we can spend the next 3 years finally solving these incredibly challenging problems, you're going to go home to Chicago. I'd be happy to return to Oshkosh, having solved these problems. At that point, our only rivalry would be Bear Packer games. So please, take me up on this offer. He looked at me for about a second. Bob, you have a question? I was the only senator that made a comment or asked him a question of which he had no response. So I think just those two stories certainly reveals my frustration, or certainly confirms my frustration of trying to work with somebody who's serious about solving these problems we just don't have a good faith party to do so.
Let's take a quick break. You've been listening to Senator Ron Johnson, Insight 2014. We'll be back in the couple. Welcome back to Insight 2011. I'm Charlie Sykes. We're taking it in front of a live and very lively audience here at the Country Springs Hotel, talking with United States Senator Ron Johnson. Senator Johnson, I wanted to ask you about something else you've been intimately involved in, generated a certain amount of controversy back home here. You filed a federal lawsuit challenging the president's very special, very sweet deal for members of Congress and their staffs for Obamacare. Didn't make you very popular. There was a certain other congressman here who took some shots at you. So what is the status of that lawsuit? Earlier this week, the government moved to dismiss it. That lawsuit, is it still alive? Is it going forward?
Oh, I certainly hope it goes forward. Yeah, the government just responded. About the only thing they did in their response was challenge my standing, which we always knew they would do, which is the highest hurdle we have. It's very difficult for a member of Congress to sue the President of the United States. It's hard to establish that you've actually had harm, that you've incurred harm.
This is the most frustrating thing, I think, for us regular people out here, when we watch the President of the United States unilaterally changing laws. You know, some of us were under the impression that the law was the law, and that if you wanted to change the law, you would have to have Congress act on it. And here you have the President delaying elements of the law, changing elements of the law, deciding what he's going to enforce. Why haven't there been more legal challenges like yours?
Because standing, you have to establish that harm has been done. And the harm that's been done to the American public was the passage of the law. And that was actually done constitutionally.
You can't just sue and say, what about the harm to the Constitution?
So what's happening now, of course, is all these delays, you're actually removing some of that harm. So it's difficult for even any American citizen to establish that harm. We think we've got a good case for standing. And if we get into court, we think we've got a really good case of overturning that ruling. But, you know, Charlie, the main purpose of the lawsuit is, to end the unfair special treatment. But it really is upholding the rule of law. I mean, we did not choose as a people to be governed by kings or House of Lords. And I think that's the basic principle here that I'm trying to affirm.
Well, I mean, last week the president actually threatened to veto a bill that would have required him to follow the law. And it was real.
Yeah.
Really, we've got...
There's a president that's willing to faithfully execute the laws that took that oath. And we're seeing that he's not doing that. What we need to do over the next couple of years, and this is why it's extremely important for Republicans to gain a majority in the Senate, is we've got to stop his regulatory overreach. He's going to continue to do this. Right now, in 2010, pretty well stopped his legislative agenda, and that's a good thing for America. But now we need to stop his regulatory overreach because, that's all he's doing now. He's legislating through regulation.
Can you do that even if you win control of the United States Senate? Are you able to do that? Or would he have a veto of any of those measures?
There's actually one pretty good law on the books. There's probably more than that, but I know of one. The Congressional Review Act, which allows members of Congress, the House and the Senate, to bring up these regulations on an expedited basis. In other words, there's no filibuster in the Senate, and we can overturn these regulations with simple majority votes in both the House and the Senate, and there's nothing the President can do about it.
I'm sure that you've been asked this everywhere you go. Your encounter with Hillary Clinton on Benghazi continues to be legendary and will live forever on YouTube. What difference does that make? Well, yes, she was not sure what difference it made. This is not going away, so I guess the question is, will we ever get straight answers about what happened in Benghazi?
I think over time we might. Let's face it, I always compare Benghazi to jigsaw puzzle. We basically know it's a ship, but there's some pretty key elements that give us some real details of what that ship is. We don't know exactly what did the president do during that night. What was Hillary Clinton doing? If she runs for presidency, I think we'll get a lot more detail from that standpoint. We don't know exactly how much she was involved early on in terms of the complete denial of added security. That dereliction of duty, I think, is something that's going to weigh pretty heavily on her chance to become a president as well. So there are questions of what happened before, during, as well as after that still need to be answered. I think over time we might get the answer, but the fact it's so hard to really find out what actually happened certainly just proves the fact that President Obama said he's going to be the most transparent administration in history.
Well, I mean, if Hillary, in fact, does run for president, obviously she's going to be running on her record as Secretary of State. And we started off the program by talking about what's going on in Ukraine and around the world. It's going to be interesting listening to Hillary Clinton identify her one big foreign policy success.
Well, she traveled around a lot.
Right.
Obviously, she accomplished nothing. And again, like Mitt Romney said, there's not a country, I don't believe, in the world that thinks or has great respect for America after 5 years, 4 years of her Secretary of State and 5 years of President Obama.
Okay, so we've been talking about what would happen if Republicans took control of the United States Senate. There is an election this November. You need to pick up 6 seats. Republicans need to pick up 6 seats. Right now, are you optimistic?
I think there's a pretty good chance we'll pick up the majority because the other side's losing. That's not good enough for me. I actually want Republicans to win a majority. I think the way we do that is we have to demonstrate to the American people, show them what we're for, which is one of the reasons, the bills that I'm trying to work on. I filed the If You Like Your Health Plan, You Can Keep It Act, a true grandfather clause. I've been working with House and Senate colleagues for the last 3 months on a piece of legislation I'd like to have titled Preserving Freedom and Choice in Healthcare. They would actually repair the damage that's been done by Obamacare, limit and prevent future damage. In other words, we would actually try and protect patients, make healthcare more affordable. The first component of that would be to eliminate all the mandated coverages. That's what's causing people to lose their healthcare. It's what's driving up the cost of healthcare. Now, I was actually heartened with the fact that there's a group of 30 House members working on something pretty similar. I'd like to think I've had some effect on that process. So, again, from as being a senator, I'm there to amplify, to support what the House is doing. That's our lever of power, and I've always done that. I've reached out, I've done bicameral strategy sessions with House members, get them to pass strategic pieces of legislation. If passed, would actually fix problems, but if not, would at least tell the American people what we're for and provide a pretty good contrast against what we would do versus Democrats.
Against Obamacare, but
or you can run against Obamacare.
And run against.
Well, and we should be pointing out all of the victims. These people that Harry Reid were calling liars.
Yes.
We need to continue to show the American people the true damage being done to real people. I think that's an integral part of it, and I think it's a legitimate point to be making.
When do you think Harry Reid said that? When did Harry Reid take to the floor of the United States Senate as the majority leader and insult thousands of Americans, calling them liars?
Well, first of all, it's because he's Harry Reid. As much as they're trying to put lipstick on that pig, they recognize it's a pig and it's a real problem for them.
Now, you actually asked for him to apologize to the thousands of Wisconsinites who've been saying they got a raw deal. Did you ever get a response from him?
Well, I actually took down 15 of my best examples from real people showing real harm and damage. I gave those to him on the Senate floor, and he said he'd read them. He hasn't got back to me yet.
I wouldn't hold your breath. So, will he ever allow a vote on any of the proposals you're talking about?
Probably not. I mean, we may have had a couple of votes on a few Republican amendments this year, but prior to January, we had roll call votes on 4 Republican amendments. Now, this is in the greatest delivered body in the world, apparently. Republicans have been allowed to basically try and amend a piece of legislation 4 times. So, no, Harry Reid does not. I mean, he's running the Senate with an iron fist. It's not ruled by majority. It's ruled by one man. And that is why the Senate is so incredibly dysfunctional. It's not because we're demanding 60-vote thresholds, which he calls filibusters. It's because we're demanding 60-vote thresholds because we have no chance whatsoever of offering amendments to try and improve this legislation.
If Republicans do succeed in taking control of the United States Senate, do you think the next time you ask a question to the president, he might actually talk to you?
Oh, President Obama talks to me.
Will he answer your questions?
Well, let's hope so. I mean, he would almost be forced to respond if we do it properly, if we utilize the House strategically, if we use the Senate strategically, not pass 100 pieces of legislation, let's pass a half a dozen or a dozen to show the American people what the solutions of the problem actually are. And you have to win this politically. This isn't just about counting votes in Congress. This is about convincing the American people that you have better ideas, that your ideas would actually improve the lives of every American, that we're concerned about every American. If we do that effectively, hopefully the president will see enough political pressure and might actually sign some of those pieces of legislation.
Senator Ron Johnson, thanks so much for joining me. We're going to make this Inside 2014. I'm Charlie Sykes.